I'm so glad you joined us for this. Here are some things that you're going to need to get started. Um, I bought my paint at Walmart for 50 cents a container, and it's Apple Barrel brand, and that's the colors that I listed here. You can use anything that's similar that's acrylic. I got black, white, English ivy green, arbor green, chestnut, harvest orange, bright yellow, lilac mist, diva pink, and red apple. Also, the brushes I got are all available at Walmart as well. I'm only saying that not just so that you go out to run to Walmart, but that you know that they are available here in town. Um, Another option is to get them online. They're available at Michael's, they're available at Joann's, pretty much any craft store. Um, but I find that Michael's delivers the fastest if you're getting it delivered at home, just so you know. But everybody has their own preference. So get it where you like to. And just make sure that the pack that you can get them all into one multi-pack of brushes, but make sure that it has a large flat brush, a small or medium flat brush, a small or medium fan brush, a small round or detailed brush, and a medium round for the berries. I used a 20 by 10 canvas, but really truly any size will do. It just depends on how you arrange it and what size brushes you use. If you choose a smaller canvas, you want to choose some smaller brushes because your technique doesn't change, but your size is going to be different if you choose a smaller canvas. If you choose a larger canvas, you want to pick bigger brushes. It's always best to have the biggest brush you can for the job at hand because that keeps you from overworking your painting. So I went with a sugar-free vanilla latte to drink. Enjoy a little bit of happiness while you're doing your project. It might not be sugar-free vanilla latte for you, but make yourself comfortable and at home. I used a heavy cup that was an old tea bottle, but you need to use something heavy, a vase, a can, a ceramic cup, something made of glass, a bottle of water, whatever isn't going to tip over and spill all over and get paint on your floor when you put your brushes in to rinse them out. Then I use a paper towel to blot after I wash the brushes. That keeps the paint from getting watered down. A pencil to sketch if you feel like you need to have something more to go by and you want to have a simple line that you can follow. Use a pencil and sketch it out first. It's never a bad idea. Just make sure you cover up your pencil marks. With that, it is time for us to get started. So let's start with a word of prayer. God, guide our hands, but even more our hearts, as we meditate on Advent by creating. You are our creator. As we create, we come closer to your image. Amen. All right, let's get creating. Taking the label off the black, but I want to show you how easy it is. These are horrible if you don't do it right, but it's this simple. Just take your scissors and make a little slit where along the plastic up and down, and then they pop right off. If you don't do it the right way, you can be pulling at these suckers forever. So please make sure that you pay attention to that because it is for your own good. Now we're going to put a little black on our palette, and we're going to put a little white on our palette. Here's the thing, it takes probably about twice as much white as black. Black is a dominant color, and it is going to dominate your colors when you mix. So you don't need as much black as you do white, but we need quite a bit of white, and we're going to bring our brush over here into the black. And what Ryan said, I'm also going to take, this is going to blow you away to see, but we are going to take a tiny little drip. It won't even be something that you see. I didn't do a very good job of cutting. won't be very perceptible, but we are going to take this little bit of yellow and pop that into the gray. And that's gonna warm up our gray, okay? Now it's not gonna come out looking yellow. It's still gonna look like gray, but if you take a look, you'll notice it doesn't look as bleak. It's gonna warm up our gray. So just a little bit of color doesn't show up the way you think it might, but it can really make a difference in what you're doing. So when you mix colors, I want you to think about that. Colors that are gonna warm up some of your darks are gonna be yellows and reds. Colors that are gonna cool it down are gonna be purples and blues. All right, so we're gonna take this gray and we are going to paint our palette. Now don't forget, you have sides on your canvas that need to be acknowledged and not ignored. I hope there aren't too many OCD people who notice that my little guy is crooked here. I apologize for the crookedness. I know that bothers some people immensely, like me. Okay, so we're gonna go ahead and do the edges first. And then you're gonna take your gray and you're gonna move in crisscrosses. Remember how I said, always, always, always go one direction with your brush? Watch how my brush is going in one direction. And I flip it in between, but there's none of this going on. So we're gonna go crisscross with that brush. You always pick it up. If you're gonna go back and forth, you can do that, but you have to pick it up in between strokes because otherwise you're gonna end up causing some damage to your bristles. And you don't want that because when the bristles start falling out, you are done, done, done. Now I want you to notice, I am no expert in getting everything right. You don't have to be. We're painting the background right now. And we're doing broad strokes and crisscross strokes. That'll help hide our brush strokes in the bigger picture. If you go just up or down or just left to right, sometimes you end up with some brush strokes that you aren't gonna like later. We're gonna pull out some more black and white here in a minute, but for now, notice I left the bottom undone. That's because I'm gonna hold it like this. And I didn't want to get my fingers all covered in paint. And I finish off the bottom. Sorry, my easel is such, it's a great easel, but I can't get to the bottom very easily on it. Sometimes you just have to fiddle around. So if you are doing it on a tabletop, which most people can do, just lay it flat on a table to paint it, it makes sense. If you're doing it that way, then blessings, you will not have the problem I just had. Sorry, get my water out of the way. That is my paint water. I put it in that fancy teacup. Okay, and see, I'm gonna go both ways on the diagonal once I have it painted solid. Now, this is a very solid gray background. That's not the way life works. So let me show you what we're gonna do. Now that we have the solid gray, remember we use this method called wet on wet, and that means we can when we add other colors, they blend in unless we allow things to dry. And we are going to allow the background to dry here in a minute. But I'm going to take some black and I'm going to brush some black up into the corners and bring that in, because our picture is going to be darker the farther away from the candles we get. So now we're going to start bringing in a little bit different of a shape in our background. Now, our light is candescent, so it radiates from those candles, and so it'll have a little bit of a roundness to it. So when I'm putting this in the corners, I'm putting a little bit of a roundness to our black that I'm adding. And the dark is going to be farthest away from the candles. And as you get closer to the candles, it'll get lighter and lighter. So all we did was brush in a tiny bit of black in the corners and along the top a little bit to just give it a little bit of darkening in those areas. And that's it. We don't want to overwork this, right? Overworking a painting is like the worst thing to do with your painting. Now, normally I would just stick this in some water and wash it out a little bit. I'm done with this brush now though. This was only for our background. And so I'm gonna go ahead and wash it out because I can. And so as you're going along, my background has to dry anyway. So I'm gonna wash my brush, spend my time wisely, probably go into the sanctuary and do a little praying. And when I'm all done, I'm gonna come out to a nice dry background and we're gonna move on to the next step. Now we're not gonna get super crazy with this because we honestly are beginners in this lesson. So we're not gonna be like, you know, Michelangelo shading, but we are going to give some time and attention to the tonal quality of our paintings. Now the bottoms of our candles are going to be covered up by the greenery. So we're mostly concerned about the tops of our candles. There are ways we can make this look more natural and ways we can make it look painfully unnatural. And the way to make it painfully unnatural is for all of our candles to be the exact same height and the exact same distance apart on our canvas. While that can have a little bit of an aesthetic appeal to it, it is very unnatural because when we set things down, we don't put them down so that they're perfect, and we don't have candles that burn exactly perfect. You can burn 4 candles at exactly the same time, and 4 pillar candles after a couple of hours are going to look totally different from one another. So it's okay for our candles to look different. Now I want you for this part to grab one of those flat brushes we talked about. I have a couple here to show, but you can tell which one my favorite is. So I'm going to use that one. This is just a Walmart one too, just so you know. It's not anything fancy. It's just some bristles are more pleasant to deal with than others. So I'm going to imagine where I want my candles to go. And imagine sort of the height. If you are one of those people who needs to have something drawn, this would be a time for you to get out your pencil and go ahead and sketch in where you want your candles to be. I'm just not always a big sketcher, so I might forgo that. But if you were sketching, and sometimes I sketch with the brush, if you were sketching in your candles, then maybe you would put one here. like this. And you like that one. Now remember this one over here, this is going to be our first one in Advent. So maybe it's a little bit shorter because it's burned a little bit more often than the other ones have. You're just going to draw that. You're just going to go ahead and pull straight down and draw your candle. You want them to be about the same width apart. So this one should be as fat as the other one probably. No two candles are the same though. So even if you bought them at the store and they say that they're a certain width, sometimes there's some deviation from that. Now remember, we're going to leave some space for our pink candle here. And our purple one down at the end maybe is very tall because it hasn't burned hardly at all. Am I paying attention to how far apart these are from each other? No, I'm not concerned about that. I am going to be concerned, like I said, however, I am going to be concerned with whether or not they are equal in their own width. So I want them to be equally wide in comparison to one another, or close to equal. Now I want you to keep in mind my plan here. This one is wider than the others. Like I said before, they just are not ever going to be perfectly the same. So we're going to chalk this up to the fact that candles are not always the same. And sometimes even, like our friend over here, sometimes even at the tops, they're going to be different than they are toward the bottoms. What I'm doing right now is not filling in all of the color. I'm giving it a little color to put inside of there. This is just kind of a first coat that I'm doing so that I can get the shape of my candle the way I want it. As you see, we don't want our final candle to look this scary. But the thing is, this lighter color that I'm working with is going to take more than one coat on the gray anyway. So it's okay to go ahead and give it this base coat that's going to give it some shape. And there I have my first candle shape. Remember, we're going to have some fluff around it, so you're not going to see the bottom of it. I'm going to go ahead and put it there. You know, I kind of like to imagine what it's going to look like if there isn't all the foof at the bottom. Now at the top of this one, I'm going to actually make a drip on the side of this one. I'm just giving it that rough first coat of purple, mostly so that I can, like I said, define the shape of this candle. Remember, at the bottom, it's got a more uniform shape. At the top, it bulges and moves in different directions. And we want that reflected in our candles as well. We are not by any means making the perfect candle, and we do not have to have our candle look like the one in the example here, but we want to be able to let that be our muse for the candles that we will have. All right, so I'm just filling this in, guys. I'm not trying to make it a solid color because it's not going to be with this first coat. But I do kind of want to get some color back there so that the second coat can hopefully cover. I've got a little bit of white and a little bit of black so that we can get a little shading in. Now we're not going to go crazy with shading, but we are going to want to, remember, make that top of each of these just a touch lighter around the rim, and then we're going to bring that light down through the middle. Here's our lighter color. We're gonna put that light up around the rim, and the parts that stick up are going to be the sections that are going to be sort of melted and hollowed out and a little bit lighter. So we're going to work that light color in here toward the rim. And it is almost instantly going to be a little bit darker as we work down. So we're going to go ahead while that's wet and see they'll blend just a little bit right at the edges. And then we're still going to get that darker, it's going to darken almost immediately. Now on this side of the candle, we're gonna go with lights on the right and toward the middle. So we're gonna, as we do this layer, we're gonna put in some lighter tones, get a little of that white brought in to show the shine of that candle right in the middle. Now that being said, toward the outside of the candle, there's a little bit more of that light toward the middle. Now don't forget that your colors are going to dry a little bit darker than what they appear. So they're always going to look a little bit lighter than the last layer. That doesn't mean they're lighter, just means they're wet. Toward the edges, I'm going to steal a little touch of that gray, and I'm going to work that into that purple, and we're going to actually pull from the edge toward the center on this one. So we're going to do it in a, remember, candles are rounded. So we are going to do that more and more as we go down. The shadow is going to get bigger and bigger the farther down the candle we go. Because as we go farther down the candle, it's going to get darker and darker because the light source is at the top. It's the candle is the light. And because the candle is the light, as we go down, that shadow is going to get farther and farther across the candle. Always curving that shadow so that by the time we get to the bottom, it's pretty much going all the way across. Got a little bit lighter there. Just need to dab my brush better into the dark. And so we've created a shadow that comes across our candle. It's a very light shadow. And any spots that you think maybe got a little too much shadow, you can always work a little more purple into, but you don't want to overwork your candle, remember? We don't want that to happen. Since this is the one on the edge, I'm going to work a little bit of dark in from the other side as well. All right, so basically I've got this done with the other candles as well, and you'll notice that I just did the purple candles. Next, we need to throw in the pink candle. Now, I know some of you probably who might be a little more OCD at times. This palette of mine might drive you crazy that I have down here, but I'm just gonna pour the pink right into where the purple palette was. And I'm gonna go ahead and do the same thing I just did with purple, but I'm gonna do it with pink. And I'm going to put in my candle, and I'm gonna go ahead and put it a little bit closer to one of the other candles so they don't look like they're like perfectly spaced out. And I'm just gonna make it whatever height feels good. What you don't wanna do is to have your painting look too regular. Too perfect and exact when it comes to all of the heights and levels, and you want to have a basic movement in your painting. So you do want to have movement, but you don't want to have it be so regulated that it looks forced. Again, we want it to be about the same thickness. I went with this really hot pink to make it sort of pop. The tradition in the church is rose for the third week in Advent. You could just as well skip buying another color of paint and make this one purple also. I just wanted you to see this kind of head on. The way we've been looking at it until now is a little bit at an angle, so I want you to see what we're looking like head on. I've got the candles and they're mostly ready. I'll probably do a little touch up here and there, but mostly they're ready, and we're going to do next the flames, and then we'll get some of the greenery on. All right, we're ready for some flames. Now, it should go without saying probably that we are done with this particular palette for just right now, but we're gonna let it sit back there because there are some colors that we might wanna have on our painting in just a little bit. So we're gonna start a new palette though with a new paper plate, and we're gonna put a little yellow, a little orange. Don't forget your trick in opening the paint. It'll save you so much trouble. Now flames can be tricky. And not only can they be tricky, but we're gonna do a little more than just a flame. I'm just gonna grab one of my flat brushes that I have sitting here ready. Normally I just wash one out and use it, but I have a weird kind of water going on and I want to hustle a little bit with you. So I'm gonna put a little water on my brush though, and a little yellow on my brush. So I'm kind of watering down my yellow. I don't want it super watery, but I want it to have a little flow to it, because what I'm gonna do is put a little bit of yellow behind. Now it looks really dark when you first put it on, but it will on that gray dry a little bit lighter. and we'll catch some of the yellow without it being super, super yellow. And that will give us our glow for our candle. And it's okay to pull some of that down into this purple because it's going to be glowing inside of the purple. And we're just going to do that on all of our candles here. Once our yellow in the background dries, then we put a little yellow flame, and I just put a touch of orange on the brush after I put the yellow down and sort of let it go where it wants to go so that we have some flames. They shouldn't all look exactly the same. Flames just do what they want to do. The only rule about flames is they like to go up. So I've got my two greens, one's darker and one is lighter, and I have my brown. Now the first thing that we're gonna do is we're gonna take one of these big brushes. It doesn't matter which one. I'm gonna grab this El Cheapo here. And we're going to put a little background in with this brush, just dry. And so I'm gonna go ahead and do that with the brown and the green in sort of a mix. And I'm gonna go ahead and put a little black into that too so that it's kind of darker. And what that's gonna do is all the places where we don't actually have a branch, we'll be able to have some color behind it so that it's not just the background. It'll appear that even though we've only painted a few, that those branches exist like everywhere. And it'll give sort of the illusion of the fact that we've painted more than we actually have painted when we get done. So what we want to do is we want that to be a little bit dry, that brush, so that's just the tip. And we're going to go ahead and dab that in along the bottom where our Advent wreath is going to go. And that will make it feel like in those spaces, at least, there is greenery even when there's not. And that way we don't have to put in as many details on top. We do want to be careful to get all the way to the bottom with this. And we're just going to fill it in as full as we think we're going to make that greenery. And you know how greenery goes. Some places are a little bit lower, some places are a little bit higher. Go ahead and just fill that in all the way across. All right. So what I have done here is I have added a few branches. Now, if you look at them carefully while there's nothing on them, you will see that there is nothing particularly beautiful or wonderful about these. They do sort of go every which way. And what you want to avoid is symmetry. So make sure that your branches are higher in some places than others. And I've chosen to actually bring them up a little bit higher in the middle than they are on the edges. But you're free to kind of do that however you feel. Just make sure that you have some nice long branches in there. For this, we're going to need the green paint and the fan brush. I actually was handing out some Sunday school stuff to people who came in, so my palette with my greens and brown is no more. So I'm going to put a little more green of both kinds on here, and I'm going to put a dab of brown on here as well. Now I'm going to show you something fun to do with your fan brush that is going to help with this. So you have to get it wet. I need to get my fan brush over here. Okay, so once you get your ends wet, I need to dump that water, it's getting gross. Then you need to flick your brush like this. And what will happen is you will get these nice, I dare not even, I'll use this water, it's equally gross, I think.
you'll get these lovely separated hunks, and that's what we need to make our pine needles. We don't want too much water on the brush, so if your brush is really wet, then what you need to do is grab a hold of it and just lightly pull. Remember, our fan brushes are delicate, so we don't want to be too rough with them. And then you're just gonna, just like that, flick it, and what you'll get is you'll get a beautiful bunch of separate little brushes, sort of. And you're gonna dip just the tips of the fan brush in the paint, and you start with your darkest color. And brown is our darkest color. We don't want a whole lot of brown in this, but we are gonna put a little bit of brown in. So find just any old branch, and we're gonna make some needles, okay? I'm not steady with my left hand, sorry. And we're gonna just brush up. This is the brown. You don't actually want full needles with your brown. We're just putting down a little bit of a base with that. And you'll see when we put the other needles on that it will barely show up this brown underneath, and it'll just give a little depth to the green. So we're just gonna put it in a few places. We're not gonna put it in too many places. We don't need to put it, you know, we don't need to put it both directions off of each of the needles. We're just putting it kind of here and there. And typically what you want to do is put your darker colors down lower on your branches. So we don't want to pick the tips of all the branches. Probably better to pick the bottoms of the branches for our brown pine needles to be forming. Again, you're just dipping the tip in and making some needles. Once you have some brown base underneath your needles, then we are going to add the greens. Remember, we always start with our darker colors first, and then we work our way to the lighter colors. I'm gonna pause our video, and then I'm going to put some serious time lapse on the next step. Okay, after you get those darker colored greens in, then it's time to brush in a little of the lighter green. Fabulous. Now it's starting to really look like there's some greenery there. We need a little more depth of our color. If we look over at the greenery that we have sitting here, you'll see that some of it almost has a whitish hue to it. And so we are going to bring a little bit of white into our green for one last layer of the greenery. See how it's starting to develop some depth with those different colors? We're going to go one more shade. All right, there we go. Isn't that fabulous? We've got some depth and some color in there. And now we have some beautiful greenery to go with our candles. Next, we're going to add in perhaps a little accent with the berries. I think I'm not going to go with the pine cones. There's enough, I think, brown in our background that kind of comes through, and I think it's enough of the brown. I don't want to overdo it. We'll see. But I do like the idea of some nice bright red in there. So I'm going to add a couple of berries. Now we're going to put some red on our palette for this one. And I, again, like the red apple for a bright red. There is an actual color called bright red, but I think that the apple actually is a brighter red than bright red. So when you go to get your red, I would recommend getting the one called red apple, because it has that nice redness to it. Now, this is where we're going to pull out the round brush. If you have your round brush, and we are going to very simply put some red circles together on this. Now, red berries come in a clump, so you're not going to see like a single red berry out there very often. Usually you see several together, and so we're going to just randomly find a spot, and we're going to put a nice generous amount of paint, but not enough to drip, in a circle to make our berry. Now these will take a minute to dry because you've got a thick amount of paint on there, but here's what we're going to do. It's going to be a little darker toward the bottom, so I'm going to go ahead and make a little bit of a U, sort of almost like a smiley at the bottom of our berry, and at the top we'll have that twinkle of white we saw when we first looked at the berries. Again, we're going to put these in a clump. Not all berries are exactly the same size, but they're pretty much always exactly the same shape. They're going to be mostly evenly round, so as round as you can get them, the rounder the better. And if you leave a little bit of a mark, it should just be a kind of a smile at the bottom. We don't want our smile at the top. So I'm going to put just 3 little berries here, and I think I might add just 1. Where I said there's not many times you see just 1, but irregularity is better than being too regular. What you don't want to do is put 3 here, 3 there, 3 there. Berries just don't naturally happen that way. But we could have 2 in a spot, and 3 in a spot, and 1 in a spot, and 4 in a spot. However, you don't want them to be too regular in their irregularity either. So just because you have 3 in one spot doesn't mean there might not be 3 in another spot. Just so long as it feels pretty random how these berries are going to fall here. Go ahead and put 3 here, but I'm going to sort of stagger where they're at a little more over in this area. Now, if you have trouble making a perfectly round circle, just remember that the last time you ate grapes, you probably didn't eat perfectly round circles. Sometimes they're a little oblong, and sometimes they're a little different in their shapes. So don't be too scared of the circle. A lot of people are circle scared. I'm going to put one over here that's really quite low. Our other ones are sort of all in the same frame as far as high to low, and so I'm going to put this guy way down at the bottom over here. A little bit of variety here, and maybe even one that's kind of running off of the page. There we go. If you, like me, enjoy an easel, I'm going to give you a little bit of advice. Take it or leave it, but here is my advice. Don't be afraid to get your easel a little dirty. It's only paint. It will be paint later, and it doesn't hurt your easel one bit to get a little bit dirty here or there. Now that I look back at it, I'm not sure I like those smiles, so I'm going to go ahead and fill them in a touch. Not perfectly, because it's okay to have a little bit darker spots, but I'm finding that my smiles are detracting instead of adding. That's sort of the rule of thumb. If something adds, great. If it detracts, let it go. Your picture doesn't have to look like my picture. My picture doesn't have to look like anybody's before it either. Okay, so we have some berries in our picture, and I think they give just that pop that we're looking for of color. And I think I like our colors. If I were to look at this and tell you what I'm not happy about, and I don't really care because the way it is every picture is different, I would say I'm not really happy about this swirl and this swirl in my candle. But it does make it unique, and light is like that. It tends to radiate out, and it doesn't always radiate perfectly evenly. But I do think that the branches turned out marvelously. Well, we're going to let those berries dry, and the last step we have is to add a little white dot on each of our berries, maybe even two on a couple of them. I'll show you our berries here, and you can see the shine on the berries and how the light kind of adds a little tiny sparkly white spot on each one, and sometimes more than one. So we're going to go ahead and put those on the berries once the berries are dry, and we are calling it done. Okay, I have dotted with white my berries, and I did them all kind of in the same spot, so it looks like the light's coming from the same direction. And last but not least, I signed the corner with my initials, and this I am calling done. Hopefully you guys enjoyed working on this project, and if you didn't work on it but you just watched, hopefully you enjoyed watching. And this is now going to sit on our altar for Advent. So happy Advent and welcome to a season filled with hope. And we know that even if we don't get things perfect, like our painting that has some weirdness here and there, and maybe the light doesn't hit it right, and maybe I missed a few spots, but in the end, it is marvelous, just like we are created by God, not for perfection, but for perfect love. And so it's not how we look, but how we love that matters. May your Advent be filled with love as we start loving each other, sometimes in some very new ways this year. But we always remember how precious and wonderful our God is. Happy Advent.